If you listened to my last video, you know that my Jehovah's Witness friend agreed to listen through a Voddie Baucham sermon on Daniel 7 with me. This is the beginning of our next very long phone conversation. We started with some usual chit-chat, and she eventually brought that around to promote some more Watchtower claims as usual. I had no problem with this, though, because it was going to open the door for me to remind her about this talk that we were going to listen to. And we will be getting to that, I promise. But first I got the opportunity to question her a bit on the claims she was making about 1914. Of course, we know that Charles Taze Russell's prediction for 1914 was actually about the end of Armageddon and all of that, not the beginning of World War I. But the organization teaches its followers to do their best to twist that and downplay the clear, total failure of his utterly false prophecy. I wanted to play this one out a bit because we hadn't directly dealt with it in previous conversations.
Oh, it's always something, it seems like, there's disasters all over the place.
Yeah.
Everything, things affecting people, and now this virus is increasing in numbers across the country and around the world, actually.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This second wave, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
what do you think about it? Do you think it'll subside and they'll get control?
Not really. I think that we'll just get used to it. I don't think it'll, because, when you look at the other flu viruses, including other COVID viruses that have been going around for years now, they're still there. And, because of that, for me personally, because my condition does have an autoimmune component to it, I've been very cautious for years about, keeping my hands clean all the time, washing all the time.
Not picking up any germs.
Yeah, exactly. So because if I catch a particularly bad virus, which I've done before, then what I end up with, I fight it off okay, but then I end up with a bad relapse afterwards because my immune system is so ramped up.
Yeah.
So
you pay for it then.
Yeah. So I'm pretty used to dealing with that and dealing with the stronger viruses that are out there, and I know what they can do to me. So I'm cautious about them, and so all of this kind of everybody doing all the sanitizing and everything, that's not new to me personally, but it's an adjustment for the rest of the world, and especially just going out places when you're sick. Like, I don't know how many times my husband and I complained to each other about why is that person showing up to work sick, go home.
Yeah. Then that's what they're advising. If you're sick, stay home.
Yeah, exactly. And that's always the case. I used to find that where I used to work I used to work with mostly quite elderly people, and some of them would come in and infect each other with viruses. And I'd be like, go home, go get some sleep. You don't need me to get sick. You don't need these other people here to get sick. Just go home, get some rest. You can come back or you can call.
Come back when you're a little healthier.
Yeah.
You'll do yourself some good, and you'll do your neighbor good too.
Exactly.
That's for sure.
Yeah. So I don't know. I guess they know it now, but.
But the Bible, getting to the subject that's a favorite of ours, both you and myself, is the Bible has talked about. When Jesus asked what will be the sign of the system when his disciples asked him what the sign of the end of the system of things would be. And in Matthew, it's in Matthew and it's in Mark and Luke, and in John also, of course, about the times that of this end, what the signs would be. And when you read those verses in Matthew 24 and 6, 7, 8, and 14 and stuff like that, they indicate that during the time of the end, these plagues, things like plagues and wars and all these tragedies, or even earthquakes, like Luke, the account in Luke describes them as great earthquakes. And we've had, some number 7s here now that are quite common. And like wars breaking out all over the place. Like, sure, we had World War I and World War II, but now it seems like the whole world is involved in little skirmishes and people can't agree. And 2 Timothy also describes the times of the end, and people wouldn't be in agreement. Children would be disobedient to parents. People wouldn't get along. There'd be divisions and things like that. So, that's happening more and more when you see the world. Like now the United States is, they're talking about, then the country has never been so divided. Mm-hmm. And even now that effect is coming into Canada,
Yeah.
So things are really snowballing and the fact that these things are happening all at once, like we're having pandemics, we're having wars, we're having shortage of foods, we're having all these things, earthquakes, and these things are happening at once. So when it's a culmination of all these things, and never before has that really happened, So, and then Bible chronology indicates that 1914 was a real turning point.
I really wanted to get her to focus on 607 because the entire 1914 false prediction is based on Watchtower's novel idea that Jerusalem fell in 607 BC, not in 586 BC. 607, or originally 606 before they realized there was no year zero, was a date that Russell came up with specifically based on measurements that he took of the pyramids. He was obsessed with pyramidology and numerology, as were many others at that time. There is a lot of evidence of this, especially in early Watchtower publications. And initially, while Christian churches called him out for his, at best, superstitious activities, his own followers were excited about it all. But in time, after Russell's death, the organization began to downplay and even outright speak against such practices. That's a larger topic for another time, perhaps. But I wanted to bring it up because I'm sure my friend totally believes the organization and all of the mathematical twisting it does to try and defend their ongoing claims about 607 and 1914. I had been hoping to plant a seed of doubt, but that proved to be a bigger challenge than I had anticipated. She was ready with her defense and again wasn't interested in hearing my questions or concerns. If you are witnessing to a JW and want to be better prepared than I was, check out jwfacts.com. They did a really helpful article that shows how the Watchtower's timeline just doesn't work historically, and in fact, it doesn't even work with their own claims.
How so?
Historians agree on that too.
How so?
Like Arthur Toynbee says that the century didn't change in 1900. He says the world changed in 1914 because up till 1914 things were going on as in the 1800s. It was just a continuation. He says, but it seemed like after World War I started, the world had changed. And if we read in Psalms chapter 2, it talks about the world gathering together in conflict, and it's a prophecy about the conflict against Christ Jesus' established kingdom. So we read those. That's indicative,
I'm just, if we could just step back a second, I just was wondering about, so are you saying that the Bible said something about 1914?
Well, we can.
Like that year?
It talks about in Luke and in the Gospels. It talks about depends on how the expression is used in different scripture and Bibles. Like some use the term end times. Some call it the time of the end of the Gentile times, and some call it the end of the system of things.
And did it say it was going to be 1914?
And well, you have to calculate. It doesn't say 1914. You never see 1914 in the Bible. Okay. But what is 7 times? If you have to calculate what 7 times is, 7 times is a time period. And the Bible gives clues about what times mean. And those clues are in Revelation, they're in Numbers, in the Bible book of Numbers, and in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, there in the Gospels, Jesus talked about them. So it's established what a time is, because Revelation it refers to time times and a half. So when you calculate what times are, then you realize you can count years.
So you don't think those are symbolic?
Well, they have to be, being that they're used in the Bible, throughout the Bible, they have to be literal, because when you read the prophecy in Daniel about the coming of the Messiah, it talks about weeks of years, and those weeks of years were a fulfillment of when Jesus would be have his birth on the earth. And so that was an actual fulfillment, because when Jesus was when the rumor got around that this Messiah was born, then those Israelites were in expectation of that Messiah around that time.
Yeah, that definitely was more literal, but is that true in Revelation too?
So that prophecy in Daniel was a literal time period. So the same thing is we can apply to the prophecy about the times and a half.
So what is that calculation? Do you know much? Because you sound like you know a lot about that. How does that calculation work exactly?
How does it work?
Yeah.
Well, when you count the actual times, then you can count from when Jerusalem was destroyed in 607.
Well, that was in 586, right?
No, 607 was when the Jerusalem was destroyed.
Well,
by Babylon.
But all the historians and the Jewish people themselves recognize 586. From what I looked into that number a little bit a while ago, and it looks like only the Watchtower says 607.
The historians have for years and years and years related 607 to the
in the
destruction
Watchtower
of Jerusalem.
Yeah, in the Watchtower. Can you find any that are not in the Watchtower?
Because you see, the reason is that's when King Hezekiah was. All the Jewish kings were spoken of as sitting on Jehovah's throne. They represented Jehovah's. They represented theocratic rule. They sat on Jehovah's throne, and that's a Bible expression too, also. So when Hezekiah was killed and taken captive, and his sons were killed, his sons were killed before his eyes, and he was killed later on in Babylon. There was no more kings after as Hezekiah was king. So, in essence, Jehovah's throne was empty. And in the prophecy, where is it now? In prophecy, it speaks of that Jehovah will give the throne to whoever he wants to, and it will last forever.
Mm-hmm.
So, from the time that Hezekiah was dethroned to Christ Jesus was 2,500. It speaks in Revelation of 2,520 days. And when history looks at days from 607, nothing happened, and 2,520 years, nothing happened. So then you obviously have to look at what that 7 times mean. Then, as I say, you check back and you read in what time means in biblical terms and what a day means in biblical terms. Then that stretches out to 2,520 years.
So I'm just wondering then, maybe you probably don't know this off the top of your head, but would you mind looking into that a little bit more and find out if you can find any scholars that would say that was 607?
Yeah. I can just check right now. Just hang on a moment. I think I have something on that. You see, whether people look at Bible chronology as being, Bible scholars looking at it, if it disagrees with the Bible, that scholar then is not considered. We wouldn't consider him worthwhile,
Right, but that's the thing.
So it has to be incompatible with the Bible.
Well, that's the thing, and scholars that have found that over the years, from what I've seen, all of them, and the Jews themselves, have always recognized 586, and that includes biblical scholars. They've all agreed with that, and there's even been archaeology to show that as well. So,
no, you see, there's an arch of triumph in Rome, and it depicts the Roman soldiers carrying off the sacred utensils of the temple. And you can talk to any historian in Rome, even the average layman, and they're aware that is in the 6,000 years of BC. The only problem they have is a lot of people don't consider that there's no 0 year in BC and AD.
Right, that's why I understand. I read from
2 years. There's a 2-year discrepancy there.
So I read that. I read that Charles Taze Russell used to say from his from the pyramid measurements and stuff, he was saying 606, and then they recognized the no year 0, so they changed to 607.
See, and you calculate the year. Israel was an agricultural country. So they counted the year by the seasons. So their year for centuries was 360 days. So if you do 7 times 360, you get 2520 years. Well, nothing happened in 2,700 years after 607. So then, of course, you have to investigate further. What does 7 times mean? Then, of course, you look into the Bible, and the Bible will indicate first or second Peter? I just forget which scripture, but it says that to Jehovah a year is like a day is like a 1,000 years.
So you use that to determine numbers then?
Yeah, and then in Numbers, of course, it talks about Jehovah counting a day for a year. So putting those puzzles together, then it comes out with 2,750 years.
Again, this is a weak play at numerology and also taking scripture completely out of context. 2 Peter 3:8 is not talking at all about any mathematical equations. In fact, it's not talking about how we should interpret the word for year at all, whether it be the destruction of the temple or even the days of creation.
Yeah, that goes from 607, from the fall of 607 BC. That's when King Hezekiah was taken prisoner, and there was no more kings on the Israelite throne. To 1914 in October, when the World War I started.
Okay, so if
then the Bible, then when you read the prophecy in the Psalms in chapter 2, then it helps clarify that a little bit more, because where the nations have gone to war against the king.
So if it is 586, as the scholars say, then wouldn't 1914 be the wrong calculation, or would you need, like, how does that work? Would you have to rethink 1914?
No, well, no. How do you mean? The calculation from 607 to 1914. So 607 to October to December of 607 is a quarter year.
So yeah, but I think what I mean though is if it actually is 586 and not 607 when Jerusalem fell, then that would affect your calculation to get 1914, wouldn't it?
Well, don't forget, the Israelites, then they had that prophecy that the Israelites would return to Israel from Babylonian captivity in 70 years. Mm-hmm. And that proved true. They returned to captivity in 537, and in 539 they had the wall and the temple rebuilt.
That didn't really answer the question, though.
Well, that 70 years then keeps. You have to. When did the 70 years end of captivity for the Romans, the Israelites in Babylon?
But I'm asking though is if it actually is 586, then how would that affect the 1914 date? Do you see what I'm asking? If it wasn't 607 and it was actually 586, then how would you get to 1914 with that calculation?
Well, if it was if as you say it was 507, then that would throw out the 70 years of captivity. That would not have the Israelites return in 537.
But you're
calculating. Then helps keep.
But then you're calculating that still based on 607.
Pardon?
Then you're still calculating that based on 607. You're still using that as an anchor date. But what if it's not the anchor date? What if it's wrong?
Well, it would have to be the anchor date, because if it was 537, then the return of the Israelites to Babylon would be off.
No.
It would have to be connected, you see.
Not from what I've seen, from what scholars have put together, and what the Jewish nation themselves, what they've always recognized.
Well, do your math then. Take 70 years from your number, and take 70 years off 607. You'd come up with different dates.
Yeah, exactly.
So that would throw off the return of the Israelites. And the return of the Israelites to Babylon is a very well-established date that history, all history, they take that in university. They take, they don't count the 7 times, because that's biblical. That doesn't interest the world. But
do you think she was about to say Christendom, but then stopped herself and said the world instead? I think so. She must have suddenly remembered who she was talking to and knew that an accusation like that would not be something I would let slide.
The Babylonian release of the captives, of Israelite captives, to return to Israel was a profound thing, because Babylon was well known not to ever release captives. They would kill captives. They took those Israelites and they let them keep in captivity, and they were they were allowed to have farms. They were allowed to quite a bit of freedom in Babylon, actually. And then they were released, which was like an earth-shaking experience for the rest of that world at that time, because it was unknown, you know. So history, establishes that when they returned, and that is a pivotal pin. That 1914 has to be the date, you see, if you're going to count 7 times, you know.
But that's assuming that that's a correct calculation.
It would also it would also be true of the 70 years that was prophesied that they would be captive, and that is the critical thing, because, as I say, the release of the Israelites from Babylon is a well-established date. So
by who?
Well, they teach that in school.
I'll have to look into that. Okay.
You know, that's established. You know.
Anyway, that's
like I say, it's if you go to Rome, that's well established, because it's the Ark of Triumph is there. You know, with the statue of the Romans carrying off the Israelites in chains, and carrying off the menorahs and all the utensils of the temple.
This was at least the second time that she brought up Rome, which had nothing to do with the fall of Jerusalem in Old Testament times. She was mixing up the first and second destruction of the temple and using both as her evidence, which contributed to my inability to even really follow what she was saying. I don't think she intended to get the two mixed up. More likely she was just excited to defend the 1914 doctrine, and she was jumping around to any defense that came to her mind at the moment. But I do think that the way JWs are trained to make these arguments are primarily to get the hearer totally overwhelmed and unable to even respond. I have to admit, if that was her goal with me, she did accomplish it pretty well. During this whole give and take, I had my eye on getting the sermon we had agreed to listen to queued up. So at this point, I decided it might be best to try and move things toward that end.
Okay. Well, thank you. I want to research that a little bit more, because that seems to contradict everything I've ever read. Like, I've never seen anybody who wasn't in the Watchtower say 607.
Well, there isn't a great. I've never heard of very many religions that are interested in the expression "the times of the end" or this.
Really?
So this is why I do think she almost said Christendom earlier, and then switched to the world. Because this time she went ahead with the same claim, and I did respond to it, or at least tried to. In terms of logical fallacies, what my friend did here is called a red herring. I was still pushing her on the issue of 607, so she decided to switch to Watchtower's claim that only JWs think about the end of the world or the last days and that sort of thing. Of course, we know that this is not true. In fact, I know quite a few Christians who are basically obsessed with end times prophecies. And even for those who are not, we are still very aware of all these prophecies in the Bible and are praying fervently for Jesus to return. Maranatha, come Lord quickly. But of course, the purpose of this deflection is to try and keep me from focusing any more on 607 and the fact that she can't defend it from a documented historical foundation. I think part of why I was pushing her on this is because my guess is that her foundation is actually 1914, and she adjusts everything else to fit with it however she can.
Oh, I know lots.
No,
that's like a common thing.
The Catholic Church doesn't. The Protestant divisions don't.
That
Presbyterians don't. They believe the kingdom is in the heart. It's not an established kingdom, so
you know what? Actually,
you don't count time.
That reminds me. Last time we talked, I had mentioned a talk that I had listened to, and it's actually about the kingdom.
Yeah, mm-hmm.
And
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you want to listen to a few minutes of that with me? We could talk about it.
Oh, sure.
Okay, cool. Let me just see if I can. I think I still have it up here. It's like an hour long, so we don't need to go through the whole thing today. Maybe we can go through some pieces of it periodically or something, but where is it? There it is. Okay. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm gonna try and put it on the speakers, and hopefully we can both hear it.
I promise we really will get started with the sermon next time. In the meantime, if you haven't had a chance yet to hear the sermon for yourself, I'll put a link to it in the notes below. We'll pick up right here next time.